let's talk about writing CRPG characters, specifically major NPCs, party members, villains, that sort of stuff. I find that this is probably the most important part of making an RPG good, simply because it's the most cost-effective part. It's expensive to polish your gameplay, it's expensive to polish your story, it's expensive to polish your presentation, it's expensive to polish your systems, but writing a better character is not necessarily more expensive. So this is a good thing to get right. Let's talk about the industry standard method first. Just at a conservative estimate, I would say that the industry standard method is used on approximately maybe 100% of all CRPG characters for the past 20 years. And I would call this the backstory method. The basic concept is that we have this cool story in this cool world. In order that the player experience it, we have to surface it. We have to allow the player to get into our cool world. And one of the ways to do that is to have a character that can represent part of that cool world to the player. So if we have elves in our world, then we give the player a character, a party member that represent elves, or maybe we make it a villain or something similar. This character doesn't necessarily have to be the perfect elf to represent elfdom. They can also be the opposite of that. They can also just grapple with it. The important part is that they are there to explain what being an elf is to the player. And because they represent some aspect of the story that no other character does, they feel super unique. This is extremely common, but there is one thing we haven't addressed. Why do we care? Unless we have an elf fetish, why are we interested in coming back tomorrow to find out more about what this elf is going to do in this story world? We have to have a method of connecting to these characters. And this is where the industry standard method comes into play, because the method of connecting to all CRPG characters is to give them an incredibly tragic backstory and let them narrate it to us one drip at a time over the course of the game. Then at the end, there is a loyalty mission, and you may or may not be able to bang them. And that's it. That's the structure. This industry standard structure works extremely well for one very important reason. It's super cheap. It's not just cheap to produce because you just need either text or a voice actor. It's also super cheap to integrate. If you've got 10 people working on narrative content for your game, it can be really difficult to coordinate even small changes between them. So if Lord Elfington had to actually do things in the game world, then you would need to have Lord Elfington's writers team up with the level designers and the script editors for those worlds and make sure that everything was working. And then if someone came by and was like, oh yeah, we're changing the fourth world from a jungle planet into a desert planet, can you rewrite all of Lord Elfington's lines? Oh yeah, and it's no longer about giant squids, it's about mecha. And the Lord Elfington's writers are going, that's a lot. And then they work 60 hours a week and get fired. So the reason that so many RPGs use this backstory approach with the tragic backstory and then the loyalty mission at the end is because it is proven to be effective even in chaotic development environments. It's also got the advantage that it already has an arc built into it. You don't have to create an arc for the character because there is a permanent arc attached to this, and that is recovering from your traumatic backstory. If the character is defined by the fact that they have an unbearably tragic backstory, then after their loyalty mission, their arc is they are no longer bound to it. They are at least a little bit free from it. They're now looking forward and overcoming their trauma, and isn't that nice? For all 85 members of your party, all of them with their unbearably tragic backstories are coming to grips and looking forward to the future in the exact same way, at the exact same tempo, in every game for the past 20 years. Yeah, that's not boring. Okay, so now we get to the heart of it. I don't like this. I don't like this approach. I think that characters should be what they do and not what happened to them off screen. I think that your characters should be involved in your game and not just narrating their backstory to you. Now, obviously, this is a little unfair. Lord Elfington here does work in the game. If you go to Elfland, Missouri, there's probably lots of elves there, and Lord Elfington steps up and says, I'm going to introduce you to the elves. Or, oh no, we can't go back there. I'd have to see other elves, and I don't want that, or whatever, right? In this task, Lord Elfington helps to unfold the present. It's not that Lord Elfington is explaining what an elf is supposed to be or representing what an elf is supposed to be. They're actively opening up the world and inviting you in to an unfolding situation. Because they are your elf representative, and they're opening up a land of elves, other elves to talk to, or other things related to what elves are. I'd like more of this. I'd like characters to focus on what they're doing rather than on what they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And the downside is it's really expensive. As we mentioned, if Elftown changes, if someone comes down from on high and says Elftown is now underwater instead of in the trees, you're screwed. You got to do everything from scratch again. It's a miserable mess. Which is why this is generally kept to just a couple of major beats, and they're locked in pretty early. So it's one of those things where you have to worry about cost, and the cost of having characters do things in the world is high. This is especially true because there is an argument against it at a more fundamental level. The trauma dump approach, where everybody has a traumatic backstory and they feed it to you in drips and drabs, that has one major advantage, and that advantage is that I can ignore it. If I don't care about Lord Elfington, I can just either not do his quests or skip through the text super fast and ignore it. But if Lord Elfington is responsible for guiding the charge into Elftown and, setting up all of these elven NPCs with various, things they need to do and story beats, I have to get along with Lord Elf for a long time. And if I don't like him, that could be a problem. So in a normal CRPG, if I don't like Lord Elf, he just sits on the sidelines, and I go on my grand adventures with the other 9 characters that I'm allowed to choose from. And it's never brought up that I never brought Lord Elf along on any of these adventures. It's just quietly shuffled under the rug. And hey, Lord Elf had the same experience everybody else did, being your good buddy, even though you put him in a closet and locked the door. I honestly think that this is almost as bad. It's like, yeah, I don't like Lord Elf, so I essentially cut him out of the plot, but you're still wasting a character. Rather than accepting the fact that I don't like Lord Elf and kind of just cutting your losses, I think it might be better to write characters that I can dislike and it still works. But how do I do that? How do I make it so that we have this setup where, the world gets unfolded by these characters, but it's okay even if I don't like these characters, I still want to have them unfold the world for me and see where it goes and all that stuff. And I also have to keep costs down. I don't want any change to the world totally wiping out all of my writing progress. I don't want to have these excruciatingly difficult, nuanced things I have to write that are going to get totally sidelined by even tiny changes. How do I juggle all of this? Well, at this point, we have to talk a little bit about CRPG structure. RPGs come in a lot of different flavors. One of the most standard approaches is a linear RPG, which, things like Mass Effect and all that jazz. Even if there are some places that you can go explore freely on your own, they are still extremely linear experiences, and the story unfolds in a very linear way with some optional side content, essentially. In this case, this is the style of RPG that struggles with integrating characters into your story, because your story is huge and the characters have to thread their way through it, and the story keeps changing as people decide, we should go this way rather than that way, we should develop this rather than that, we need to cut costs here, we can add a couple budget pieces there. This means that it's always going to be difficult to integrate stories like this with characters that are not central to the story. It's okay to try and write like the villain or something like that, because they're integral to the entire linear experience. But Lord Elfington isn't the main villain. He's not the main character. He's not driving the entire experience. He's just there to open the world up for us and be our friend. And that's going to get difficult to do. If you're a one-person team, you might be able to pull it off. If you're doing things solo, I do recommend trying it. But if you got like 4 people and things are changing every day, it's not going to work out very well, is it? But this isn't the only kind of RPG there is. And I would argue that even if you do have this kind of RPG, it's even then not the only kind of RPG that it is, because you can have several different kinds of RPGs layered on top of each other. A good example of that would be any RPG with a management system in it. Now, most RPGs have some small amount of character management. Oh, your Lord Elfington went up a level. You can choose what his level update, what he learns on his new level. But you can also have a more general management for the kingdom, or your little group of people, or your mercenary band, or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And there are plenty of games like this, from things like BattleTech to Dragon Age, Solasta, Shadowrun. These all involve managing at a larger level than just your little team. Just the stats of your little team. There's money, there's places to go, there's things to focus on, there's factions to integrate with. And this is a powerful way to allow us to get our characters in the door, because management always, or almost always, involves some kind of stock interface, some kind of mission that you go on over and over and over. For example, in BattleTech, you go from star to star and you pick up mercenary contracts, and the majority of these mercenary contracts are randomized. So they're represented by skulls, and you get a summary of the situation that they're happening in and what they are. And there's no plot. There's no story behind what's going on. But going on these missions will, ingratiate you with the faction that hosted the mission, probably piss off the faction that they're against and that sort of stuff. And it costs a certain amount of money. It happens in a certain place. It takes a certain amount of time. This same factor, the same set of options happens in a lot of different setups. So, you might get like, do you want your kingdom to do this for the festival or this for the festival? Do you want your kingdom to put a tax on grain? Do you want all of these options for managing your kingdom, right? This is a very common RPG setup for managing a group, and it shows up quite a bit, but it usually shows up largely character-free. Sometimes you can choose which character should tackle a task, but the characters don't have very much opinion on the tasks themselves, and they don't bring them up. And that's what I'd like to propose. If you're doing a management system with a bunch of different factions in it, why are those factions headless? If I'm going to do a mission for Renraku, or for the Star Alliance of Davies or something like that, why is it just a banner? Why is it just this is the Star Alliance and you have a +10 alliance with them? I have a character on my team that represents something about the Star Alliance, because it's a cool part of the game, and therefore it should have some kind of interface with the player, and there should be a character related to it. So here's the Star Alliance player, right? The character on our party. Shouldn't he be the one helping me get these missions and giving me clues on how they're going to unfold? And as his story arc progresses, shouldn't he be going up the ranks, or getting more allies, or learning more secrets about the Star Alliance? Shouldn't he be giving me more interesting and challenging quests? Shouldn't he be making me choose between the Star Alliance and another faction, also represented by somebody that we're in close with? So here's the thing. Because these missions are stock, they don't take very much effort to create. Obviously, there's some initial cost, but the individual missions are either free because they're generated randomly, or they're extremely cheap because they're very basic. Either way, they integrate with our overall mission system, our overall management structure. They cost a certain amount of money, they take a certain amount of time, they take a certain number of people offline for so long or whatever. Combining that with these characters should allow us to let these characters slowly open up more and more missions from that faction that are more difficult, more iconic, more profitable, and pit them more aggressively against other factions. During all of this, the character is saying stuff. They're doing stuff. They're with you. They're the one that's responsible for getting you these missions, and they're the one talking up these missions. Now, this is just one example of what we might do to make the characters exist in the current time, but this has one big advantage over the tragic backstory approach, and that is you're there for it. As these characters do their missions, do their thing and sync up with their new faction and so on and so forth, they start to drift into their story arc. They realize that this faction they joined is not all sunshine and roses, or they realize that the leader of the faction killed their father or something. And you get to watch that descent happen over the course of the game. Mission to mission, the parameters start to change, their take on the missions start to change, and you get to see that happen. You're there for it. They are doing things in the game world almost as if they're part of your fucking story. I think that the cost of this isn't that high, especially in terms of integration. I think that it could be integrated pretty easily in comparison to having them be part of your core story at a core level, because these are randomly generated or quickly generated side quests. This is very suitable for, West Marches style games where you're exploring the cosmos and doing missions as you go. They're very suitable for any game where you run a faction. And I think that we can probably find ways to make this kind of character growth work in other environments. I just haven't figured it out. Haven't figured that part out yet. Anyway, this video is super long. Let me know what you think. Have a good time. Bye.